Wyoming Territory, January 1883. The wind had teeth that morning, and it bit hard. Snow whipped across the plains, dragging ice through the broken boards of the old barn just outside of Elk Hollow. Inside, tucked between a stack of hay bales and an overturned wheelbarrow, a young woman lay curled in her torn wedding dress, her breath shallow, her lips cracked and blue. Her name was Clara Jane, and she was 7 months pregnant. She was not supposed to be here, not like this. Not alone. Not freezing. The barn groaned under the weight of the storm, and Clara pressed her back against the post behind her, trying to stay upright. She had not eaten in over a day. Her gloves were gone. Her boots had holes packed with straw. The baby kicked weakly, a flutter barely there, and she whispered to him or her soft words she could not feel on her own tongue anymore. "You stay with me," she breathed. "Don't you go. You stay." The pain in her side had started late last night, but she had not cried out. There was no one to hear. He had left her. She had waited at the church in her mother's wedding dress, one hand resting on her belly, the other holding a wilting bouquet of wildflowers. He never showed. By nightfall, she heard he had run off with the banker's daughter and a sack of stolen money. Clara had walked until her feet failed her, until her body gave in. She found the abandoned barn by accident. Maybe it was God. Maybe just luck. But she was running out of both. The barn doors creaked in the wind. Snow blew in through the cracks. And then the door groaned louder, this time not from wind. Clara blinked, disoriented, her vision swimming. A tall figure stepped in, shaking snow from his hat and coat. He had a rifle slung behind his back and a saddlebag over one shoulder. His boots were worn but sturdy, and his face, when he pulled down the scarf, was sharp and sun-weathered, with a dark beard and eyes that scanned quickly and thoroughly. He spotted her in the corner. "Jesus," he muttered. Clara tried to speak, but her throat only rasped. The man dropped to his knees beside her, yanking off his gloves. "You alive?" She nodded faintly. "You're freezing." He looked around, then pulled his saddlebag forward and began working fast. He shrugged off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. "You're gonna be all right. I got you." He cleared the hay into a pile, pulled out a small bundle of kindling and tinder, and lit a fire in an old iron feed bucket he found against the far wall. It took time, but when the flame caught, the heat spread fast. Clara cried the second the warmth touched her skin. "Easy," he said gently. "Easy now." She looked up at him, eyes glassy. "Who are you?" "Name's Paxton Keller." "Was just riding through. Saw smoke from the chimney, thought it was shelter. Did not think I'd find," he paused, voice catching on the word, "a bride." Clara's hand brushed the tattered lace at her shoulder. "Not anymore." He did not ask questions she was not ready to answer. Instead, he fed the fire, then reached for her hands and rubbed them between his palms. "How far along?" he asked. 7 months. Her voice trembled. "I think something's wrong." He leaned in, listening to the rhythm of her breath. "You cramping?" She nodded. "Since last night." Paxton pressed his lips into a tight line. "All right, I can help you. I have some experience. Traveled with a couple midwives a few years back. Learned what I could." Clara stared at him, blinking away tears. "I am not going to let anything happen to you or your baby," he said. She sobbed then, and he let her, holding her close while the fire grew. He brewed tea from an old tin in his pack, adding a pinch of crushed willow bark. After she sipped it, her body slowly stopped shaking. Hours passed. The storm howled on, but inside the barn, the air grew warmer. By nightfall, Clara was sitting upright, wrapped in Paxton's coat and 2 saddle blankets. She watched him shovel snow into a pot to melt for water, his movements calm and sure. "You saved us," she whispered. He looked over his shoulder. "You are not out of the woods yet, but we will get you there." Clara's eyes filled again, but this time with something softer. "Why are you really out here?" Paxton stirred the snow in the pot. "Drifting. Worked cattle last fall near Cheyenne. Headed toward Montana for spring. No one waiting on me." She nodded. "Same." He met her gaze across the fire. "You married?" "I was supposed to be." Paxton did not push. He only nodded once. That night, he slept sitting up against the wall, his rifle across his lap. Clara drifted in and out beside the fire, her breathing steadier, her skin warmer. Morning came clear and quiet. Clara woke to the smell of coffee and Paxton crouched beside the fire, frying cornmeal cakes in a pan. "I thought I dreamed you," she said. Paxton looked over and gave her a soft smile. "No dream. You were still here." She reached for her belly. "The baby kicked strong. That fire saved us," she whispered. Paxton poured her a cup of coffee. "That fire was nothing without you fighting through the night." Their eyes held. For the first time in days, Clara smiled. She finished the food slowly, her strength returning. Paxton helped her up, steadying her when her knees wobbled. He never looked away, never let her fall. "We cannot stay here long," he said. "There is a cabin about 8 miles north. Belongs to a widow I know. She will take us in. You think you can ride?" Clara hesitated, then nodded. "If you are with me." He stared at her a moment, then helped her into his saddle, guiding the horse with care while he walked beside them. The barn faded behind them, but his fire had already done its work. It had saved her. And something else had started too. Something neither of them expected. Something neither of them wanted to let go of. The horse moved slow through the drifts, its breath steaming in the brittle dawn air. Paxton walked beside it, one hand steady on the reins, the other resting lightly at Clara's boot as she balanced side saddle on the blanket-covered saddle. Her hands clutched the horn, knuckles raw above the fabric of her sleeves. They traveled north, skirting the frozen creek beds and snow-choked ravines. The wind had eased, but the cold clung to the earth like it meant to never let go. Clara didn't speak much. Her lips were pale again, but her eyes tracked the land with weary clarity. "How much farther?" she asked, voice thin from the strain of the ride. "Couple more miles," Paxton said without looking up. "Terrain's flatter from here out." She shifted, wincing. "You holding steady?" "For now." They passed a cluster of cottonwoods stripped bare, their branches black against the snow. A skitter of prairie grouse burst from the brush, flapping into the white sky. Paxton paused, watching them vanish. "You always live this rough?" Clara asked, her voice hoarse but curious. "Rougher some years. Depends on the season." She lifted her gaze to him. "You don't seem hollowed out by it." "I've had my share of empty stretches," he said. "I just don't let them carve too deep." She nodded slowly. "I used to think I was strong." "You still are." "That's not what people said when I didn't leave town after he ran." Paxton stopped walking. The horse shifted beside him. "What do they say?" "They say I must have done something to deserve it. That I trapped him. That men don't run without a reason." He blinked once, slow. "People who ain't walked through pain got a habit of talking like they've earned the right to judge it." Clara looked down at the saddle horn. "You believe in starting over?" "I believe in surviving first. The rest comes after." He turned and kept walking. She watched the slope of his shoulders, the way he moved careful but sure. They reached the edge of a rise where the snow thinned around a cluster of outbuildings. A low cabin sat beyond a split-rail fence, smoke curling faintly from the crooked chimney. "That her place?" she asked. He nodded. "Martha Ridley. Took me in once when I was laid up from a busted leg. She'll do the same for you." Clara hesitated. "She's kind," he added. "And she don't ask for explanations." They reached the cabin yard as the front door creaked open. A woman in her 60s stepped out wrapped in a patch cloak, her gray braid thick over one shoulder. She had a shotgun in one hand, but when she saw Paxton, she lowered it. "Well, hell," she called, voice raspy. "I thought the coyotes had eaten you by now." He broke into a tired grin. "Not yet." Her gaze shifted to Clara. "She yours?" He looked up at Clara, then back at Martha. "Not yet." Martha's brow lifted. "Well, come in before you both freeze through." Inside, the warmth was sharp and sudden. A small stove hissed in the corner, and the scent of yeast and lard hung in the air. Clara sagged as Paxton helped her down and led her to the rocker near the hearth. Martha took one look at her and began setting out clean linens and a basin, not asking a single question. Later, while Clara rested in a narrow bed tucked under a window, Paxton stood at the stove, drying his gloves. Martha ladled stew into a tin bowl and handed it to him. "She's too thin," Martha said. "She's been through a long few days." "She yours or not?" He took the bowl. "I said not yet." Martha snorted. "You look at her like you already made your mind up." He didn't deny it. After dark, Clara stirred. The bed creaked softly as she sat up, her palm over her belly. The wind had died. The quiet inside the cabin felt heavy with breath and firelight. Paxton crouched beside her and offered the stew. She took it in both hands, careful, quiet. "I don't know how to be alone anymore," she said after a while. "You won't have to be." She looked at him, her eyes tired but steady. "You don't have to say that." "I don't say what I don't mean." He stood and began spreading a bedroll near the hearth. Clara watched him for a long moment. "I don't know what comes next." Paxton met her eyes. "We'll find out together." The days settled into rhythm as the wind calmed and the snow crusted under skies the color of hammered pewter. The cabin walls held steady, and so did the quiet understanding between Paxton and Clara. Each morning, Martha boiled water for washing and laid out a clean apron for Clara, who now moved slowly but with more steadiness. Her color had returned, though she kept one hand near her stomach each time she stood, the memory of pain lingering beneath her ribs. Paxton rose before light. He split wood behind the shed and carried it inside, stacking it without needing to be asked. He didn't linger indoors more than he needed, but when he did, it was always near Clara, though never too close. That afternoon, as Martha mended a curtain by the hearth, Clara sat at the table peeling potatoes with a paring knife dulled by years of use. Paxton leaned against the doorframe, his hat in his hands, watching her fingers work. "Did you ever have Ken out this way?" Clara asked without looking up. Paxton nodded once. "Brother. Levi. He went north after the war, married into a Blackfoot family up near Fort Benton. Haven't seen him in 8 years? Why not? Sometimes folks need different kinds of peace." He found his in quiet. "I wasn't ready for that yet." She glanced up. "Are you now?" He studied her face, then the knife in her hand. "I might be." Clara smiled faintly, then winced as the baby shifted under her ribs. "You all right?" he asked. "Just crowded in there," she said, pressing her palm gently to her side. "Feels like they're trying to stretch out and find a window." Martha chuckled from her chair. "That'll be a stubborn one." "You ever have children?" Clara asked her. "2 boys. Lost both before they could grow whiskers," Martha replied. "One to fever, one to the Arroyo flood in '64. Paxton bowed his head slightly. Clara reached across the table and rested her hand on Martha's, fingers light. "I'm sorry," she whispered. Martha blinked once, then patted Clara's hand. "You just make sure this one gets into the world safe." Outside, the clouds began to thin, and Paxton stepped onto the porch to watch the light shift. The snow had taken on a faint golden cast, not yet warm, but not cold either. Clara joined him a while later, wrapped in a shawl that Martha had pulled from a cedar chest. She stood beside him, her breath visible in small, steady puffs. "I keep thinking about what comes after," she said. "You don't have to yet." "I know. But I still do." He tilted his head. "What do you see?" She hesitated. "A place of my own. Somewhere quiet. Chickens, maybe. Garden in the spring. I want to raise this child knowing days can pass without fear." He nodded, his gaze still out on the distant tree line. "That's a good thing to want." He didn't say more, but he didn't move away either. Clara looked sideways at him. "What would you do if you weren't drifting?" He ran a thumb along the brim of his hat. "Build something that holds." She waited. When he didn't go on, she asked, "You mean a house?" "I mean a life," he said. She turned toward him fully. "You think we could do that? You and me?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he looked at her, really looked like he was measuring something not just in her words but in the way she stood, the way she didn't flinch under his eyes. "I think we already started to," he said. She let out a soft breath, tight with relief. "I'm scared." "So am I," he said. "But I'm still here." She reached out and touched his sleeve. "So am I." The wind picked up again, but gentler now, more whisper than roar. Inside, Martha stirred the coals and added another log. Behind her, the cradle Paxton had carved in 2 quiet evenings waited near the hearth, its sides smoothed with care, its curve holding the promise of something lasting. They didn't speak more that night, but when Clara lay down, she didn't reach for the wall like she had before. She let her hand rest in the space between her bed and the floor, waiting until she felt Paxton's fingers brush hers, solid and warm. She didn't let go. Neither did he. By the first stretch of February, the snow had hardened to a brittle shell over the hills, and the air no longer cut as sharp. The cabin held its own against the cold, its seams sealed with care, the roof now braced with new beams Paxton had traded for in town 3 days prior. He'd taken Martha's mule cart into Elk Hollow and returned with flour, lamp oil, and 2 bolts of muslin Clara had asked for without much explanation. That afternoon, Clara sat at the small table with the cloth spread over her lap, needle in hand. She worked slow and careful, the stitches even. Each pass of the thread pulled a little more color into her face. Paxton came in with his boots thick with frost, carrying a bundle of fence rail he'd cut down from the tree line. He set it beside the hearth and eased onto the bench across from her. "You've been at that all day," he said. "It's not just for busy hands. It settles my mind. What are you making?" "Shawl for the baby." She didn't look up. "I've never made anything for someone who didn't exist yet." He tilted his head. "They exist to you." "I reckon they do." She tied off the thread and traced the edge of the cloth with her thumb. The fabric was pale blue with a faint pattern of leaves stitched along the border. "I used to think I'd be a mother in a white house with green shutters," she said. "Rocking chair on the porch. Milk pail by the door. All of it neat. You still could be. I don't need it to look like that anymore. It just has to be real." He reached across the table and touched her wrist with 2 fingers. "It is." She studied his face. "When did you know you wanted to stay?" "Somewhere between watching you fall asleep by the fire and hearing you laugh with Martha over burnt biscuits." Clara's mouth curved slightly. "That was her fault, not mine." "I know. But the sound was yours." She folded the shawl and laid it aside. "I don't know if I can be what you need. I haven't said what I need yet." "Then say it." "I want a place to come home to that doesn't feel borrowed." He leaned in. "And I want you there." The wind hissed against the eaves. Clara stood slowly, one hand braced on the table, the other resting below her ribs. "Then you better build us something solid." "I will." They stood facing each other, the quiet between them warm now, steady. That night, while Martha slept in the back room and the fire dipped low, Clara sat on the floor near the cradle, her shawl wrapped around her shoulders. Paxton joined her, cross-legged, his hands resting on his knees. "I've been thinking about names," she said. He looked at her, waiting. "If it's a girl, I'd like to call her Ruth, after my grandmother. She was strong without being hard. And if it's a boy, I can't think of one that feels right." He nodded slowly. "Levi," he said. "My brother's name. He was the first man I ever saw hold a child like it was the whole world." Clara's throat worked. "I like that." They sat beside the quiet cradle until the fire dimmed to coals, and when she leaned against his shoulder, he wrapped his arm around her without a word. She let her eyes close there, her breath even. Outside, the stars burned sharp and cold, but inside, something had taken root that would hold. Not just warmth, not just safety. A beginning. Earned and real. The thaw came slow, creeping in through the soil before it touched the air. By early March, the icicles had shrunk to stubs along the eaves and the snow melted into thick, wet banks that soaked the hem of Clara's dress as she stood in the yard, one hand pressed to the small of her back. Paxton was in the field beyond the barn, driving corner posts into place with a maul. He claimed the southern slope for a paddock once the ground dried, and every evening he came in with his shirt damp from sweat and his boots caked in mud. He never said much about the work, but Clara could see it in his posture, the way he carried himself like a man building something he meant to keep. She watched him now, the rhythm of his shoulders as he lifted and drove the post, the way he paused every so often to glance toward the cabin. He always checked on her, even when he didn't call out. "You're gonna wear a path in that spot," Martha said from the doorway, balancing a basket of washed linens. Clara turned. "My back's sore. Walking helps." Martha nodded. "I had a mule that used to do the same when she was about to foal." Clara raised an eyebrow. "Not calling you a mule," Martha added. "But you are pacing the same way." Inside, the heat from the stove hung heavy. The last of the winter stores were thinning. Only 2 jars of last summer's peaches remained on the shelf, but Martha didn't seem troubled. "You're not going to stay here," she said later, while sorting through a pile of worn flannel. "He's building that shed into something more." Clara folded a blanket. "He hasn't said that. He doesn't have to. He's not the kind who puts his back into something he doesn't mean to stand beside." Clara didn't answer, but her hands stilled over the fabric. That night, a storm rolled in from the west, just rain this time, but hard. The roof held, and the new chinking Paxton had set kept the wind from singing through the walls. Clara woke with a start near dawn, pain tight across her hips, and Paxton was beside her in an instant, already pulling on his shirt. "It's time," she whispered. He didn't panic. He helped her up, steadied her walk, called for Martha without raising his voice. The labor stretched long. Martha coached her through each wave, her voice calm and firm. Paxton sat just outside the door, boots braced on the floor, hands clasped. He didn't leave, not even when the hours dragged and Clara's cries broke through the walls. Just before sunset, the cries changed. And then another sound. Small but fierce. A newborn's first breath, full of defiance. Martha opened the door and nodded once. Paxton rose like something had snapped loose in his chest. He stepped inside, careful, silent. Clara lay back, damp curls stuck to her forehead, but her eyes were steady. "A girl," she said, voice raw. "She's here." Paxton approached the bed. The baby was wrapped in a square of muslin, her hair dark, her mouth still tight from wailing. He knelt beside the mattress and looked at Clara, then at the child. "Ruth," he said. Clara nodded. He leaned down and kissed Clara's temple, then rested his forehead against hers. "You did this," he whispered. "We did." The rain blew on through the night. The stove hissed and the cradle rocked gently beside the hearth. In the weeks that followed, the land softened. Paxton's shed took shape into something more, a small house framed with hand-hewn beams, its windows set wide toward the creek. He built it with care, each board fixed with quiet intent. Clara moved slow those first days, but she moved with purpose. She nursed Ruth in the rocker by the fire, stitched curtains from the same muslin Paxton had brought home, and filled a small box with letters she never mailed. Letters to her mother, to the girl she once had been. She didn't need to send them. It was enough to let them rest. One morning, Paxton came in early, dusted with sawdust, and set a ring on the table beside her tea. It wasn't store-bought, he'd carved it from antler, smooth and pale. He didn't ask. She slid it on and smiled. They married under the cottonwoods when the buds first broke green. Martha stood for them, and a few neighbors rode in from the far homesteads to bear witness. Someone brought a fiddle. Ruth slept through most of it in Paxton's arms. That night, with the moon stretched wide over the hills and the fire low in their new home, Clara lay beside Paxton and listened to his breath. "Do you think she'll remember any of this?" she asked. "No, but she'll feel it. That's how home works." She turned toward him, her hand on his chest. "You feel like home." He didn't answer, not with words. He kissed her slow, kissed her as if there was nowhere left to go but here. Spring drew on. The fields dried, and Clara planted onions and beans behind the house. Paxton fashioned a cradleboard for Ruth when they rode to town. Neither one of them drifted anymore. And sometimes when the sun dipped low and the house was quiet, they sat on the porch, hands linked, Ruth dozing in her father's arms, and watched the sky turn gold. They had built something real. And it held.